Hi, friends. Thanks for joining me for another of our Unfolding the Word studies as we continue examining 1 Kings chapter 19, looking at the topic of spiritual discouragement, depression, how we get there, how God meets us in the midst of it, his answers to it. And chapter 19 of 1 Kings helps to answer all of that by an episode out of the life of the prophet Elijah. Today I'm going to pick up our reading in verse 9. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left. They seek my life to take it away." And he said, "Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by. A great and strong wind tore the mountains, broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. We've been talking about how God meets us in the midst of the trial, and particularly as we're in the midst of the pits themselves, how God responds to us. We saw that God shows us here that he begins responding to us at the place we are. He sends his angel and provides for Elijah very practical things, food and drink, gets him replenished, lets him sleep. He didn't begin with challenge. He didn't begin even with a direction. He came to that, of course. He was going to give him a command to travel to Mount Horeb. He begins exactly where Elijah was, and he helps him. And sometimes that's what we need. Loving care and encouragement, provision, so that we can then begin to address the things that need to be addressed in order to solve the discouragement. Yesterday, we began to examine the fact that God then gave some perspective. After providing for him, he gives him some perspective on the situation. Sends him 40 days without any perspective per se, where he had to obediently follow the Lord's direction to go to Mount Horeb. Remember, he had abandoned the Lord's call before this. Now he's following the Lord, heading to Mount Horeb. And once he gets there, then God puts him in a place to start to give him perspective. And he asks him a question, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" You remember yesterday we talked about that, and it wasn't that he's saying, "What are you doing on Mount Horeb?" He was there because God had commanded him to be there. Now the question was, what are you doing? Why are you here? Why are you in the state that you're in? The emotional state, the spiritual state. Why are you discouraged? Why are you depressed? State your case. Let's put it out on the table. Let's then talk about it together. Why are you so discouraged? Why are you so despairing? And he lays out some of the facts of the matter, the opposition of the false prophets, the insidious influence of Jezebel and Ahab and so forth. He lays it all out on the table. Now God moves further with him and puts him in a place where in so doing, putting out the facts, he also would be able to start to see the facts behind the facts. In other words, the issue in Elijah's life wasn't solely the opposition of the Baal worshippers. It wasn't solely the opposition of Jezebel, who now was trying to seek his life again. They'd been trying to do that for 3 years. No, he, and after stating that, then puts it in the real perspective. And he then admits to God, but maybe to himself for the first time, what was really troubling him. This was the issue. Elijah comes before God and he says, "God, I've been faithful to you. I have listened to the call you placed on me. I went and did this difficult thing on the Mount Carmel in the 18th chapter. I was zealous, persecuted, but I still trusted you and I still obeyed you. In response to my obedience and zeal, what happened? Everything fell apart. My zeal was not rewarded with evident success. The enemy didn't roll over. No. Lord, I expected you to work differently than you did. What I'm really troubled by is not the circumstance, but that the circumstance isn't what I expected you to do. My real problem is I'm upset with you, God. It's not only that I'm upset with the Baal worshipers in Israel and upset with King Ahab and his wife Jezebel. I am that, but truth be told, Lord, I'm upset with you. Why are you letting this happen? And why haven't you chosen to respond to my zeal, my obedience, my boldness with victory? Why? Why? Essentially, he's saying, by putting it that way, listen, it hasn't worked out the way I expected. It hasn't been such a good deal serving you. The psalmist in Psalm 73 picks up on the same thing. He sees the prosperity of the wicked and he sees the problems of the righteous, and he says, what value is there in righteousness? What value is there in serving you? But of course, he then is quick to say, if I really held that position, I would be untrue to the next generation. So he understood it wasn't the right conclusion, but he struggled with the thought. Certainly that's going on in Elijah. He was upset with God because God didn't work life out the way he thought he should. He's looking at his own life now, Elijah, and he's saying, listen, my faithfulness has not been rewarded with prosperity, success. It hasn't even been rewarded with respect from my countrymen, which I would really like. I don't have any of those things. And now, to cap it all off, instead of killing Jezebel, she's still out there as a thorn in the flesh. She's threatening my life. Why are you doing these things, God? I am really, ultimately, upset with you. Bottom line, he was upset with God. Serving God had not produced what he'd hoped it would. How many believers, perhaps even you who are listening to me, have been upset with God because after you've surrendered to the Lord or seeking to serve him and be faithful to him, you haven't found the wealth, you haven't found the respect, you haven't found the health, you haven't found the happiness, you haven't found the church growth, you haven't found the wicked overruled? How many of you are struggling with God on those kind of issues? Those are the things that set us up for despair, discouragement, and depression. And God picks up on this, and in response to it, he says, here's the key, Elijah. You need to see me properly. Your view of me is too small. Your view of me is too limiting. Here's the issue. Elijah suffered from what everybody suffers from, and that is they have a deficient view of God. What do I mean by that? We don't see God as he is. The only way we can see God as he is to become immersed in the scriptures, to see as he reveals himself in the scriptures, to see him as he actually is. All of us, therefore, have a certain mixture of idolatry in our thinking, because how we conceive of God is not totally formed by the word. It's formed by our culture. It's formed by our own wishes. All of us suffer from that to a degree. Elijah was suffering from it too. The purpose of the scriptures, among other things, is to correct idolatry. Only when we learn who God is as he shows himself to be in the scriptures do we have a way of correcting a faulty picture of God that exists in our minds. It's a proper quest for you and I as a believer, and it was a proper quest for Elijah to see God as God has revealed himself to be. I was thinking of Jeremiah chapter 9, verses 23 and 24 in this regard. Listen to these words. Thus said the Lord, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, nor let the mighty man boast in his might. Let not the rich man boast in his riches, but let him who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord who practices steadfast love and justice and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, declares the Lord. Boast in the fact that you know God. You cannot know God if you do not know the scriptures. All you will know without the scriptures is an idolatrous view of who God is. We need the Word. We need the Word. And so what we're going to find now as we continue our study tomorrow, Lord willing, God goes through a theology lesson with Elijah, correcting a limited view of God that Elijah possessed. Elijah saw God in a certain way, which was only partially true, and he needed to see God accurately. Join me as we turn to that teaching lesson from God.